So welcome back to Orchid House. I'm Olivier in Fort Lauderdale, and today I wanted to show you and talk about my Stanhopea annulata. It's just one flower. There's supposed to be two, but the other bud got killed by the thrips. And it's not a big flower, it's not a big plant, so once you see it from afar it won't look super impressive, but there's a lot to talk about, and it's a really fascinating plant like all the Stanhopeas. So there's approximately 70 Stanhopea species, and 9 of them are considered primitive. I find that to be an obnoxious term. It doesn't sound very positive, right? Primitive. So the reason is that to identify Stanhopea you need to look at the lip, and that's how you tell them apart. And the primitive species actually have lips that are more simplified. They are not as elaborate and as your standard Stanhopea look. So if you go back 2 or 3 months, I made a video on the Stanhopea flower structure and my Stanhopea impressa, and then you'll see what a typical Stanhopea flower looks like. This one is different because it's missing a few parts. So typically you have the hypokyle at the top with the sac, and then the mesokyle and the horns, and then the epikyle. And in these primitive species, this one in particular is missing the mesokyle, and it's missing the horns. So you have the epikyle here, and then at the top the hypokyle, and there's nothing in between. So these primitive species are perfect for South Florida. Stanhopeas tend to be more intermediate growers, intermediate to warm for the majority. So South Florida works, but it's not always a perfect environment for them. The primitive species will all of them, the 9 species, will thrive here in South Florida. So these plants like heat, they like shade, they like wetness. There's actually 4 different groups. So Annulata and Avicula is one of them. They look like this. They have beautiful, I would call it gold orange colors. There's a group of 3 that are white, reichenbachiana, which is my favorite, with a very deep sac. And the hypokyle, you have Candida, which is the opposite. It's a very straight, flat lip. You have grandiflora, then Tricornis, which is a separate one, and then a last group with 3 more odd-looking plants that are Pulla, Cirrhata, and Ecornuta. So I'll put all these names below the video. I'll also put a link to my other video. But those are all plants that will thrive here in South Florida. Now they all typically only have 2 flowers, reichenbachiana, but the white ones can have 4, but typically they have 2. And these 2 flowers are typically side by side. So the one missing here is actually the exact mirror. So the other flower would have the epikyle facing here, and so they would be the mirror of one another. So 2 flowers is not a lot. These flowers are smaller, so these plants are smaller. That's what you typically encounter in that group. But I bought this plant less than a year ago. It's already blooming. And Annulata can actually bloom year-round, and you can have a lot of spikes at the same time. So that definitely compensates for the size and the fact that it only stays open like for 2 or 3 days. This is actually the second day. It's perfectly fresh. Yesterday you couldn't really tell the column because the dorsal sepal was leaning against it. It was kind of hiding it. But okay, so Annulata. What's typical of Annulata? So you have here the ring around the epikyle. Avicula is the same thing. To my knowledge, they are the only ones who have that. The one at Avicula is actually more obvious. Then you see the petals. They are recurved. Both petals are recurved here. For Avicula, they are straight. Then you have the dorsal sepal, the lateral sepals. The dorsal sepal kind of hides, at least the first day it hides the column. At Avicula the column is actually longer. another difference between Annulata and Avicula is that Annulata, the apical here is pretty much the same width, or maybe even wider, slightly wider than the hypocyle. For Avicula, the apical is markedly narrower than the hypocyle, so that's another way to tell them apart. So you see, it's not very difficult to tell one from another. Avicula tends to be bigger too. The biggest difference is actually it's tough to find Avicula. That's a plant that's hard to come by. This baby here, Annulata, grows in Ecuador mostly, also in Colombia, but it's mostly an Ecuadorian species. Avicula grows in Panama and mostly in the Darien Gap, which is an area that's hard to reach, so that might be why it's less common in the trade. Hugely fragrant, like all Stanhopeas. It's impossible for me to describe the fragrance. I would say I love it. It's really pleasant. And okay, so you see, it's not a big plant, which is a plus. I mean, these Stanhopeas, one of the negatives, they are big plants. The beauty is that they grow like crazy. They are eager growers. Most orchids are lazy, right? They are very slow growing, some of them exceedingly slow growing. These ones, they want to grow, so they can have many new bulbs per year, and they can also have many spikes at the same time. Like I said, this one, Annulata, once happy, should be free flowering, so you should have flowers year round. And I'm really upset there's only one flower, because you could really tell them. They are really cute side by side, but that's the way they look. And as far as the color is concerned, I mean, it's variable, but it's always in these tones, like what I called orange gold or something like that. So that's it for Annulata. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.